We're going to turn first to another ridiculous issue similar to the Espionage Act, and that is everything happening with the FTX exchange and Sam Bankman-Fried and cryptocurrency writ large. And we are very, very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Chris Caruso, who's an economic researcher and also the operations director at the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. Chris, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Eugene and Ronnie. I'm a huge fan of the show. Absolutely indispensable information.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And we're glad to have you here because I feel like, I don't know, there's so much to wade through with the whole cryptocurrency thing. And I think a lot of people have been probably seeing the Sam Bankman-Fried. They've seen he's gotten arrested. They heard something about FTX. But maybe if you just could give us maybe a capsule view of like what this crisis is really about. Like what was this FTX and why is everyone kind of freaking out that it collapsed?
Absolutely. So FTX was the third largest crypto exchange, meaning it was a place to go and buy and sell so-called cryptocurrencies. The most famous of which is Bitcoin that people have probably heard of. The immediate cause, the kind of proximate cause seemed to be this competition with another exchange called Binance, and that the CEO of that exchange, heavily implied that there was something suspicious happening over at FTX, which basically created a kind of classic bank run where people said, well, I'm going to get my money out of there. And then that revealed that their money was in fact already gone and that they had already been the victims of massive fraud. But this was just disclosed by this bank run that's happened in the past few weeks that took FTX from being valued as a $32 billion company to bankruptcy in a matter of less than 2 weeks. So this is very dramatic.
Chris, obviously, like a lot has been made about this particular cryptocurrency FTX and about the Sam Bankman-Fried and sort of his personal lifestyle, and also the fact that he was very close with politicians, which I want to obviously maybe talk a little bit about that too, because he did donate quite a bit of money to try to seemingly have control over those who would be tasked with regulating cryptocurrency. But actually, before we get into that, I'm curious, it's being framed also by crypto enthusiasts as like something exceptional because it was this kind of Ponzi scheme. But is it that much different than other cryptocurrencies? Because we're kind of seeing this trend, right? Where for the last, I don't know what year, all these different cryptocurrencies are either devaluing or collapsing. And it's led to a lot of questions about whether this is actually like real money, whether it might have the capability of impacting other parts of the economy. When it comes to cryptocurrency, is this more proof that it's some sort of scam, or is FTX like totally different than all the other cryptocurrencies out there?
I think that's really the key question, Rania. And I think that, the term cryptocurrency is a misnomer. They are in fact not currencies in any meaningful sense. What they are speculative digital assets. People bet on them. They hope that they might go up so that they could sell them and make money. And, what we experienced in previous years with these crypto markets was simply, the inflation of a classic asset bubble. And that bubble began to pop, when, if we could date that to when it was when the Federal Reserve Bank started to raise interest rates, and this era of cheap money started to come to an end. But let's just think about this for a second. There's a certain intuitive appeal to this idea of, okay, well, I could use Bitcoin on the dark web to buy an illegal drug and have it shipped to my house so I can enjoy it, right? And people say, okay, well, I've done that, so so Bitcoin is money, cryptocurrency is currency. But of course, a means of payment is only one part of being a currency or a money. And we know that, it's very common for all kinds of things to be used as means of payment, that in the US prison system, cigarettes are used as a means of payment. If you go to Burning Man, you'll find out that Snickers bars are used as a means of payment, right? Things can be used as a means of payment that doesn't make them money. Why doesn't it make them money? Well, on the one hand, they don't scale very well, right? So if you have, you could run a Burning Man for a couple weeks on Snickers bars, but it would be hard to run a global economy using Snickers bars as money because they don't scale, right? There'd be a lot of impediments to doing all of your transactions with Snickers bars. Well, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies also have a massive scale problem, that they're deliberately very inefficient, that Bitcoin can only, settle, a handful of transactions in the same time that, old clunky non-sexy technology like Visa could settle tens of thousands in the same amount of time. And in addition, the electricity usage of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is, astonishing. It's equal to the amount of energy that the entire country of Argentina uses in a year. So it's an incredibly inefficient system that doesn't scale. But in addition to that, money, real currency, is not just a means of payment, but it's also a store of value. And that's really important, because if people work and they save and they're trying to save for retirement or pay for their kids' education or whatever, imagine, what's happened in the last year in cryptocurrencies. They've lost 70% of their value, right? Investors have lost $2 trillion. So this is an incredibly bad way to attempt to store value. And in fact, it is cryptocurrency is nothing other than a speculative digital asset. And I think actually the best analogy would be online poker. People remember that, maybe 15, 20 years ago, online poker had a kind of heyday. And I think what's great about that analogy is it's a zero-sum game, right? That, when you go and play online poker, no value is created in the world, right? It's just simply a redistribution from the sucker's money to the scamster's pockets. And in fact, that crypto is also a zero-sum game. And the vast majority of crypto investors, of which there are many millions, invested last year in 2021 when it was at its peak. And the vast majority have lost enormous amounts of money. And I think this is becoming a political question, a social and political question, of especially these young men who were, seduced by this kind of libertarian ideology that is wrapped up in the cryptocurrencies, used to sell cryptocurrencies. And they all thought, they were geniuses when they were riding that asset bubble on the way up, and they were beating the system, and they were beating the man. And now, as they watch, in many cases, their life savings disappear overnight, it's not likely that they're going to reevaluate and just say, well, that was a really stupid investment on my part. They're casting around looking for scapegoats right now. And I think this is a very politically explosive question, as well as an economic question.
I'm really glad you raised that, Chris, and it speaks to the next question I want to ask you is sort of, what does it even say about where we are in capitalism that, on the one hand, you have, these investors, the whole stonks thing and everything as well with how that was going, people who are just so desperate to try to use this to get rich quick. But then also, and I've noticed a number of people pointing this out, when you look at the investors in FTX, it was like every single major bank, investment houses. The type of people who allegedly are sophisticated enough to see through these kind of scams. And they also seem somewhat desperate to just get in on anything that'll get them rich quick. And it just feels, I don't know, I'm just going back to what I learned in school, that, capitalism was supposed to be this deep, robust system where you invest and you create new things that meet people's needs, and it becomes self-perpetuating. But this feels like the opposite of that kind of grade school definition.
I think it's a great point. And I think that, if capitalism was working really well, even from the point of view of the capitalists, why would they be putting trillions of dollars into, essentially just a speculative gambling enterprise? And you're right. Your intuition is absolutely right. The economy is not going really well. In fact, there's overproduction in nearly every industry in the world. And this is, can be very counterintuitive, because we have enormous amounts of poverty and inequality. And And it awfully much feels like there's not enough to go around, when in fact the problem is the opposite. The problem is there's actually so much overcapacity that if a rich person wants to invest and get a decent return on their money, it's difficult for them to invest in the real productive economy because it's already covered. They could already produce more stuff than we could buy with our, very low wages. In the United States, the wages for the bottom 80% of wage earners, so-called non-supervisory wage earners, have been more or less flat when adjusted for inflation since 1973. That's when the purchasing power of the American worker was at its peak, was 1973, right? So capitalism is not working well, certainly not for the working class and the poor, but increasingly, the rich are having this problem of the inequality has proceeded at such a pace. The rich have accumulated so much money at the top that they literally don't know what to do with it anymore in a way to keep accumulating more capital. So they are forced to go into these more and more speculative domains to continue to pursue a rate of return. And, many of them, which are just, vaporware, like cryptocurrency, is essentially, tulip mania without the tulips, going back to one of the kind of classic asset bubbles from early Dutch history. This is tulip mania, but with digital tokens instead of tulips. And if the economy was healthy, then this kind of stuff would be, much better regulated, even from the capitalist own point of view. But to say, briefly why it's not is simply because, they had foresight enough to spread around a lot of this money that they were taking from investors and give it to politicians. There's a massive revolving door of people that are supposed to be regulating cryptocurrencies between government and the crypto industry. And also all of these celebrity endorsers, right? There was 4 major crypto exchanges that had, high, placement in the last Super Bowl, these payments to all of these celebrities to convince people to, give away their money to these crooks like Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah, you really, you did. You had LeBron James, you had Larry David. I think that was one of the most, that was like one of the best commercials. It was so-called one of the best commercials was with Larry David. You had Matt Damon as well, has been pushing this not just recently, but for years. Yep. And there's also been, it doesn't seem like there's any accountability. In this case with the FTX exchange and Sam Bankman-Fried, he's been arrested. But why do you think that is? Why is it that this one time there's some accountability? Like, what about all the other times when you've seen people losing all of their money? Is the fraud here just that bad?
Yeah, I do think that the scale of the fraud is, shocking. And I think, despite this kind of, the sales pitch, this kind of verbiage of, this kind of utopian California ideology mixed with, libertarianism, and then dressed up with this so-called effective altruism. This was, a story that was being sold. But in fact, the actual crime was just bald-faced, right? If I could read a quote from the new FTX head, John Ray, who took over, and he said that people were comparing FTX to Enron, who famously robbed a bunch of people. He said Enron was a highly orchestrated financial machinations by highly sophisticated people to keep transactions off of balance sheets. This, FTX, is not sophisticated whatsoever. This is just plain old embezzlement. Once you just literally scratch the surface of this kind of razzle-dazzle tech and libertarian, smokescreen, there's frighteningly little to it. In fact, SBF himself said that that the technology behind FTX was basically a Google spreadsheet. And so this is the scale of this fraud is extreme, but also you may have seen the news that there's 4 or maybe 5 relatively young tech billionaires who have mysteriously died young in the past few weeks. That enormous amounts of this money is coming from illicit activities, organized crime, international drug sales, and this is being, just old-fashioned embezzled through these exchanges. And when all that money disappears, right, it's not insured by the FDIC, right? There's nowhere to go for it. I mean, these FTX investors are not going to be able to get their money back. It'll take years, and they'll get a tiny pittance back of what they lost if they're lucky. But it sure seems as if some of these larger, less savory investors are taking matters into their own hands, and I'm sure that they don't want that to get too out of control as well.
No, I think that's a very, very good point. Well, there's a lot here. I mean, it's quite a rabbit hole given everything we've been sold. So we'll have to keep bringing you back and keep following this, Chris. But we really appreciate you joining us to help us at least start to sort through some of all this morass.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.